So, Rochana, thank you very much for talking with me. I like to start at the very beginning, which is where and when were you born?
Okay, right. So first of all, let me greet you and everyone else who is watching by saying Ayubowan, Vanakkam. There are two languages in my country, national languages, Sinhala and Tamil. My language, my mother tongue is Sinhala, so my greeting is Ayubowan. And that means may you have a long life. So Ayubowan to you and everyone else who might be watching this.
Thank you.
Yes, so to start off with your question, I was born in a quaint town called Peradeniya in the Kandy district, Sri Lanka. Incidentally, this is where I went to university as well, University of Peradeniya, also known as the Garden University of South Asia. I was born on the 5th of February 1996. So 2 days from now, I'll be 26 years old. I'm the second in my family, born 9.5 years after my sister.
You're an Aquarian in Western astrology, and they tend to be visionary, future thinking, very thoughtful people. Does that apply to you, do you think?
Um, I think so, but I'm a little confused because according to Eastern astrology, I'm a Pisces
Yeah.
because we go according to the birth time. So the time that I was born and the latitudes and longitudes and everything, on dependent on that, I'm Pisces. But I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm both Aquarius and Pisces, I think.
Mm. Yeah,
Don't really know.
in Vedic astrology, I'm Taurus, the bull, and in Western astrology, I'm Gemini, the twins, and they're very different. So, I, but maybe your approach is right. We can draw from both aspects of that. Um,
Yeah.
what did you learn from your older sister and your parents and your friends and your school and the media about what it means to be a good Muslim?
I'm
I mean,
Buddhist,
excuse
by
me,
the way.
Buddhist. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, good woman.
Yeah, okay, no, yeah, sure. So I think at this point I have to say that I was born and bred in a very, very privileged setting and atmosphere, especially in terms of gender. For a very long time in my life, I didn't really have to grapple with struggles that might have been present for upper girls like me. Worry that. But even if we did have a brother, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't have had different or discriminatory treatment from our parents because my parents were also born into families that valued education a lot and education indiscriminately for boys, all boy and girl children. So all the women in both families have prioritized their education and career, and for many many generations as well. So, for example, my paternal grandmother gave priority to establishing herself as a teacher, and only got married at around 30, and this was in the 1940s. So my maternal grandmother, on the other hand, got married very early at around 18, and she was a housewife, and perhaps because of that, she ensured that her daughters, that is my mother and her aunt, prioritized their education and career. So both my sister and I have had no restrictions whatsoever when it comes to education or career choice or traveling. Those typically independent activities. So especially within my family environment, there was no desolation or distinctive treatment or discriminatory treatment as such that I experienced as a woman. But of course, there was a very general stereotype that was kind of spoken of, that women should be like this, but it wasn't really serious, at least in my case. And also, I have to say that I'm very happy that my parents have grown and learned immensely with us. So if they had outdated views related to gender, they're both slowly circumventing them. They are traditional to a certain extent, but very, very open to learning. So that's it about the family background. As for peers, well, so I went to a girls only school from age 6 to 19, and actually that's the norm here in urban areas in Sri Lanka. You have girls schools and boys schools, and these are usually the state schools, right? And the state schools are in Sri Lanka, they're considered, privileged, prestigious schools. I'm not sure how it is in the US or other countries. So even at school, so when you hear this, I think this is a little odd for Europeans and Westerners, US people from the US to hear that we are kind of segregated into our genders, and it might come off as a little restrictive and outdated, and it actually could be outdated. But this was not in terms of how because outside school there was no segregation as such. Like it was okay to hang out with people of the opposite sex. It was just that, so this is a very colonial type of school. So in that sense, it's a little outdated, and people actually talking about it that we should have mixed schools. But anyway, be that as it may, we have segregated schools. But the thing is, at school we didn't really feel that we were girls specifically. So you get your girl identity when you're conscious of a boy identity somewhere near you, right? But here at school, we were just people, we were just kids. And we became conscious of our girlness only when we interacted with boys outside school, or when we worked with other boys' schools, or for example, when everyone is basically together. So we had all these leadership roles at school, right? We did things on our own, even stuff like carpentry and so on, which are traditionally thought of as men's work, right? So we did all of that. We were really conscious of this difference in certain ways. However, there was definitely a strong adherence to gender stereotypes and roles ideologically. So technically, we would do everything. But we also grew up with notions of what it was to be a well-behaved girl, well-behaved woman. Such an environment then becomes this very fertile breeding ground for, sort of women being pitted against each other, I think. So good girls didn't have boyfriends, and bad girls did. And so there was an environment where it was sort of okay and right to sort of slut shame a bit. And I was also sort of one of them when I was a kid, because I thought I used to believe that there was a certain way a woman or girl should behave sexually, right? So there was that kind of very sort of toxic environment as well. But I see that changing, thank goodness. I see girls of 18 years, 17 years at school, and they're very, very open-minded. So I think things are changing. So I think you asked about media and social media as well. I guess it's the same kind of attitude that is being perpetuated through media and social media too. Good girls are like this, bad girls are like this. This is how good women behave. This is how bad women behave. So yes, and you asked me about Buddhism, right? So Buddhism has had very little influence on me personally as a woman. Like, it has never been gendered for me. But as a person, I have been influenced by Buddhism, right? So according to Buddhism, we believe in karma and rebirth, right? So karma is where you believe that, if you do good, you're going to get good happen to you, and if you do bad, then bad will happen to you. I think that has governed a lot of my actions, a lot of my behaviors. So this is not a very fatalistic thing, right? It's not like you have to accept everything that's happening to you, but then you get the sense that you are responsible for what you do, and everything is on you. So if you do something bad, then you shouldn't be surprised when something bad happens to you. So I think that has influenced me a lot. And as for, I think all religions do have this very restrictive, stringent, patriarchal element to them. But that is, I think, very cultural. Like, people have sort of tweaked and twisted religions to suit their own agenda, right? So, for example, now Buddhism is just technically it's just a philosophy, but then in my country, and this is not only this is not exclusively to Buddhism, but I think it happens with all religions. Culturally, they've tried to sort of tweaked it to suit a patriarchal framework. So if, for example, you probably would know of this common notion that, South Asian religions sort of have this, so if you're on your period, if a woman is on their period, they're not supposed to go to the temple and stuff like that. But I think those are very, very new additions, because I think, according to what I have read, in Buddhism, there is no specific thing about menstruation in that aspect. But for example, if you take Islam, people think that, women are prohibited from going to mosque and praying, right? But the thing is, what happened was that what was advocated was that, women have to undergo this painful period, so they can not pray if they want to, right? So it was a lenience that was sort of given. You don't have to go to mosque, or you don't have to pray, because this is a very difficult period in your time. But then people sort of tweaked it into saying that, women on their period, you shouldn't do this and that, right? So the same thing has happened with Buddhism as well. There are a lot of beliefs that, Buddhist women shouldn't go to temple when they're on their period, or they shouldn't go and worship when they're on their period. So just to contextualize a bit, so in Christianity and in Islam, in all the Abrahamic religions, you pray, right? And praying is like a faith-based thing, like you sort of ask for something, if I'm not mistaken. But in Buddhism, you don't pray, you worship. So you basically salute, you give respect. So when we say we are worshipping the Buddha, we are actually just giving respect. We don't really pray, right? We don't, technically that is not part of Buddhism, where we ask for stuff, right? So there are these beliefs that, women shouldn't go to the temple, or women shouldn't worship while they're on their period, or in some instances, some people believe that women shouldn't go to the kitchen when they're on their period. But all of these were probably introduced, a long time ago, as a way of saying that, women, you don't have to work, and, you're sort of exempt from all these activities, right? And I talked about worshipping, and there's one other cultural tradition which I actually hate. So during wedding ceremonies, you have the husband and the wife, and usually in our countries, it's the norm for the woman to be younger than the man, right? So there is this practice of women, worshipping their husbands, right? They would sometimes prostrate down to their feet or knees and just worship them as a sort of salutation, right? I see this as very outdated, because this was not how it was meant to be. So that so at the beginning of this conversation as well, I started by greeting you like this, right? So this is a salutation. So what I believe is that originally, and actually there is evidence to show that originally both husband and wife should salute each other, because you're showing respect to each other. But now, people have tweaked that, and, only women do it for the men. And I see that as very outdated. And that is something I would really like to sort of, sort of eliminate from society and, current cultural values. So, yes, and I hope that answers your questions.
Yes.
Yes.
When I was in India, I saw a Brahmin wedding ceremony, and one of the things they did was bind their wrists so that, like, they were bound together. And I think she did something where she prostrated, she kind of bowed to his authority. So I think that's part of Hindu tradition as well.
Yes, I don't know much about Hindu tradition to sort of dispute or talk about. Maybe it is the case in Hinduism, but I just wanted to talk about Buddhism in my country at least. Yes.
Could you say a little bit about Sri Lankan background? I mean, what's in the news is civil war, the Tamil Tigers versus the rebels, and that went on for years and years. I wondered what are the kind of political influences that have shaped your growing up years?
Okay. So so the war ended in 2009, but it technically was never end, right? You have these ethnic problems. So I have to say that Again, I have to bring in my privilege here because I grew up right in the middle of the country and in a very comfortable zone of the country where I actually didn't feel the war was happening, right? Because a lot of these bomb blasts took place in the capital city, and so we have this very important temple in Kandy, right? This is the main Buddhist temple. Um, it's where we have the tooth relic of the Buddha. So that was bombed somewhere in the 1990s. But after that, there wasn't any major, bombing. So I actually didn't feel much. I just saw stuff on the news, and we were worried about our relatives in the capital in Colombo, but. And also once we had this bomb scare at school. I think we were 10 years old. I think we got this news that someone was going to bomb our school, but I think that was a hoax. It didn't happen, and it didn't seem that it was going to happen actually. So we did have this fear. But for me personally, I actually didn't have it I didn't have that, fear for life basically. I just knew that this was happening. But, after the war ended and then I started reading up on stuff, then I realized how grave the whole situation was. Then I learned about displacement, and there are still people in the north who are displaced. And I learned so much about the history of the Sri Lankan Civil War, and then I realized how grave this whole situation is. And all I have to say is that I really hope we don't get into another situation like that. So that's what I have to say about the Civil War.
Who's in power now? I mean, people who speak Tamil or people who speak Sinhalese, or is it mixed?
Oh, it's always Sinhala, by the way, because I mean, the majority is Sinhala. You do have Tamil ministers and so on, but they're very rarely in higher positions of power.
Mm-hmm. May I ask, were your parents teachers like your paternal grandmother?
Okay, so they are kind of teachers, but they're university professors. So they're both in the faculty of medicine at my university. So I'm like a fifth generation, teacher. I'm also a lecturer in the university.
And is your older sister also a professor?
No, she's a lawyer. She did teach at one point, but she left that job and then she started working at a firm. I think she wants to get back into teaching, into lecturing once again.
Mm. And what did you focus on in your university studies? What was your field?
Okay. So my field, I have a degree. We focused a lot on post-colonial literature, feminist literary analysis, and then language and planning, social linguistics. That was the main crux of my main degree. But then I also did other subjects like, so for example, I did Islamic civilization because I wanted to learn more about Islam, and then I researched on Muslim women as well because it was I wanted to understand different religions, and I also learned a bit about Hindu temple architecture as well. And then I did subjects like Sanskrit, psychology. So I kind of wanted to do this variety of subjects alongside my main degree of English. Yes.
When did you start thinking of yourself as a feminist?
I think it took a long way. So at age 14, I was the type of person to very proudly proclaim that I was an anti-feminist. Yes, I was that bad. And then at age 18,
Why? What was your thinking? Because you didn't hate men?
Oh gosh, I feel so cringy. Oh god, it's so cringy. No, I thought, oh gosh, I thought, women already had their rights, so why are women fighting for more? And then I also thought, this is how the world should be. I like being helped by men and, stuff like that. And I thought that, feminism was about hating men, right? So, oh gosh. But I think I'm glad I went through that phase because it helps me understand what other people might be thinking. So I know how to approach them. And I know how they feel. So that part of my life, as cringy as it may be, it has actually been helpful in my dissemination of feminist awareness and knowledge. But I think I started to identify as a feminist maybe at around age in 19. So at 18, I started to realize that the way I had been thinking was totally messed up. And then I think at age 19 is when I really realized, okay, I am very concerned about women's rights, about women's history, about women's way of seeing things. So that's when I started to realize, okay, yeah, I am a feminist. And then after that, also it took a long time to sort of build up. I'm still learning. I mean, we never stop learning, right? And I follow the precept that there is always a better feminist than myself out there. So I always take every opportunity to learn. Yes. So yeah.
Where, did you have courses in university that were called women's studies or gender studies or feminist studies?
No, we didn't. But I think, like everyone in my department, said that they've already undergone, feminist studies of some sort. So whatever subject that we did, they would always incorporate the gender element into it. We would always have gendered readings of whatever we did. It was like the norm, de facto reading. So I think even though we didn't have separate women's studies courses, we did have women's theories to feminist theories that we used in literary analysis. And I use that as a teacher of literature myself. I always make sure that we have this gendered reading of the texts that we do.
What were books that were really influential in shaping your understanding of gender roles and the women's movement?
Okay, right. So I think in class we did a lot of Mary Wollstonecraft and then Bell Hooks, for example. So Bell Hooks is from whom I learned that so people have this notion that women, when they come into places of power, they'll be better leaders, right? But then Bell Hooks talks of how no, women can also be oppressors in a certain way if they follow this patriarchal framework. So that influenced me a lot. That changed a lot of how I was thinking. And then of course Gloria Steinem. I love her work, and I think there are these several books about. I think I've mostly been influenced by books on women's history. I think because then I start to see that okay, things are not really much different. People react. So for example, if you take when women fought for voting rights, men reacted in a certain way, right? They acted in a certain way, and then you see that whenever women try to introduce something now in the 21st century, these other people, they would react in the same way. And then when I say that people reacted the same way when women asked for voting rights, they would be like, yeah, well, voting is this basic human right. And then I'm like, well, think of this as basic human right too. Like for example, representation in films, maybe that is also a basic right. And so I think mostly it's books on women's history that have influenced me, along with Bell Hooks and Gloria Steinem and writers like that.
What about any Indian or Sri Lankan writers that have influenced you closer to home?
Okay, so I have to I was born and bred in a sort of environment that we read mostly Western fiction, right? So I started reading Sinhala fiction and everything a little later in life, right? So even when it comes to women's history, I read. I think the most prominent women's historians in my country are Kumari Jayawardena and Malathi Diarbes. So I came across their writing only very recently, like within like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. So they have definitely influenced me. So I have, gone through the history of my country, and there's still, more to learn. And then there's this poetess called Gajamannona. She wrote during the latter part of 1800s. Her stuff hasn't been translated into English, so I want to work on that, maybe if I can. It's really fascinating to see her work because it's very, very sexual and erotic, and she's very independent, and she embraces her sexuality, and she talks very openly about it, and that made me so this is something that I've known for a very long time. I've actually written about it a long time, like when I was a teenager as well. I think a lot of these attitudes that we have related to women have actually come from Victorian England, right? So I think if you look at our history, I'm not saying that, we were completely, we had very advanced laws when it comes to women. But if you really look at our history, you do see that. So you do see instances of where women have had a lot of liberty when compared to their Western counterparts, right? So they have never had this problem of owning property, for example. They were able to own property, and there was instances where there was this matrilineal family as well, where instead of the woman going and living with the husband's family, the husband would come and live with the woman's family. And then when it comes to fighting martial arts as well, so you hear instances of Joan of Arc and other women who were burnt at stake, right? I mean, they went out to war pretending to be men. And then when they to give her some title. So there have been instances like that. One famous example is this woman called Edanwage Disapatini. That's actually a title that was given to her by the king. That was because she was a martial artist and she beat all the men at this sort of game that they had. And then the king was very impressed, and then he gave her all titles and an elephant, which was unusual to give a woman at that time. Yes, so I would like to read more into women's history in Sri Lanka, and like you said, so there's still a lot more that I have to get influence from when it comes to women's history in Sri Lanka.
Mm-hmm. There's different branches of feminism. There's reformists, socialists, radicals, separatists, political lesbians, cultural feminists, eco-feminists, post-colonial feminists. Which approach do you think is the most useful in understanding gender relations, or best suits
That's really
you?
good question. The problem is I actually don't know if we can say that one type is better than the other, because whatever it is, I think they all have their own priorities, right? So ecofeminists talk about things in terms of environment and animals, and that is just as important as talking about post-colonialism, right? So I'm personally not someone who is so much into environmental rights or animal rights, but I do admire people who speak up for those rights, because they're also doing some kind of help, right? And they're talking about what they're most passionate about. So I might be a sort of like a post-colonial feminist, I think. But that does not mean I think that it's more important than eco-feminism or any of the other, or reformist feminists, feminism. So I think all of them are pretty much equal, and I don't want to say that one is better than the other.
How would you define your emphasis as a post-colonial theorist? What does that mean that you study and think about and approach?
Okay, so yeah, you're making me think about myself. I'm not sure if yeah, so I think I am a post-colonial post-colonial theorist in the sense that I like to sort of, sort of like to analyze, hegemonic standards and imperialistic frameworks that were, imposed by, colonialism. So in that way, I'm a post-colonial theorist definitely, or post-colonial thinker definitely. But come to think of it, I'm not sure if I'm a post-colonial feminist, if that makes sense. Because I talk about colonialism and its standards and its hegemony, but I'm not sure I talk of post-colonialism and its impact on women specifically. I just talk about post-colonialism and its impact on colonized societies in general. Think to be on par with masculinity. So if you could I maybe give you my definition of feminism maybe? So
Please.
that would yeah. So so I think people have this common misconception, right, of feminism. So I say I'm for equality between the two sexes, hence I'm a feminist, and then people would be like, you just call yourself a feminist, how can that be equal, right? So people have this problem with the term fem, right? So the thing is, whatever that is fem is seen as inferior, and feminism is about raising that up to an equal level with the masculine, right? So that is what feminism is about. And this does not advocate for women becoming men, obviously. No, it's about increasing the approval for those considered feminine. So when they're equal, then it won't really matter what gender does these things. Like, for example, education. Education at one point used to be seen as a masculine project, but now it's not so. It's this, sort of equal thing, right? I mean, just because you have education doesn't necessarily mean that you're a man. So yeah, just raise the level of things that are considered feminine, and then things will be all right. I think that is basically my premise of being a feminist.
And what classes do you teach now?
I teach mostly literature, so post-colonial literature. I teach theater courses, American, Czech theater. Then I teach. There have been some instances where I've specifically taught feminist literary theory. Like I've done Vagina Monologues, by the way, by Eve Ensler. And then I teach British Renaissance poetry. So in fact, just this morning I finished a class on women's poetry in the Renaissance, British Renaissance period. Yeah, so within post-colonial literature, I teach Caribbean and South Asian predominantly. Yes.
You teach what? Skype made a blurb, so I couldn't. You teach mainly what in post-colonial literature?
Right. South Asian and Caribbean literature.
Ah, Caribbean. When you talk about a feminist analysis of literature, what does that mean exactly? How is that different from someone who doesn't do a feminist analysis?
Okay. So, for example, I'll talk about my undergraduate thesis because that's the first thing that came to my mind. So my undergraduate thesis was based on memoirs written by, that was sort of centered on a Japanese geisha, a London prostitute, and a Hindustani tawaif, that's a courtesan, right? So all three of them were written from the perspective of women, but they were written by men, right? So what I did in my thesis, I analyzed the male authorial voice. What kind of politics might they be projecting by using this feminine voice? So at the time that they wrote these books, they were considered radical because they were giving voice to women who were kind of outside the mainstream, right? Women who were not really, considered to be, proper women. So in that way, they were radical. But even so, they were projecting, or they were furthering a project of, imperialism, and they were furthering this whole chaste woman versus whore binary, right? And they tried to project this view that uh, that 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 what ultimately I realized was that this whore, this prostitute, is just as important for the sustenance of the patriarchy, just as the chaste woman is needed for the patriarchy, right? And you can have a Madonna only if you have a whore, right? So you need both of these binaries to sort of help the patriarchy to sustain. So you see how these male authorial voices, they try to, project all of this. And I think that is possible when you do a feminist reading of these texts, because otherwise if you just read them on the surface, you would just go by whatever that is on paper. But you have to go beyond that. You have to go beyond what is on paper and try to do a gendered reading of it, try to take into account their genders as well and how they've been socialized.
You wrote and directed a play about Muslim women and their access to abortion. What kind of led you towards that creation?
Okay, it wasn't based on religion or anything. It was just a play on abortion. Like I didn't, there was one Muslim character in it, but that was just it wasn't the central focus of it. So my play was on a consultant gynecologist who had been caught having performed a series of illegal abortions for the past year. I included women who had been raped or who had been abandoned by their lovers, and
Excuse
they came
me.
to
Skype
abortions.
Skype skipped, so it blurred. All that we heard was that the play was about different kinds of women, one Muslim caste, and then Skype did strange things. So if you would repeat that about the play, that would be good. Thank you.
Okay, I am so sorry. Okay, right. So my play was on a consultant gynecologist who had been caught having performed a series of illegal abortions for the past few years. And the play revolves around the conversation between this gynecologist and the detective in an interrogation room in the police station. So the play depicted a series of flashbacks of the experiences narrated by the doctor. And she talks about the women she had to perform abortions on, and also the women she chose not to perform abortions on. So, for example, so there was some in the play. There were some characters who had been raped. There was one character who was raped by her father. Then there was another who had been abandoned by her lover. And then there was another one who was raped as a minor. Right. So some of them, they had abortions, but there was also another couple who came to this gynecologist. So apparently the man is, according to my play, the man is an abusive man, domestic violence and everything. And then the woman just wants to abort the child because she doesn't want to bring that child up in that atmosphere. But then in the play, the gynecologist dissuades her from having the abortion. Instead, she encourages the woman to leave the husband, and bring the child up on her own. So we talked about so many issues related to how religious leaders, for example, should not have a say in matters related to abortion. And then we talked about I tried to complicate this whole argument of how the only thing that matters is your free choice in abortion. So I am pro-choice definitely, but I tried to nuance and complicate it, right? Because for many reasons. Because people do have concerns of what abortion might lead to, right? Whether people might just start aborting people who they think have deformities, for example. So whether that is right, I actually don't have an opinion on that, but I think I will form an opinion. I just need some more learning to do. So yes, that was my play on abortion.
Mm-hmm. What's the legal status of access to abortion in Sri Lanka?
It's illegal. It's illegal, but it does happen. It does happen very secretly, but also in some cases it happens in a safe way as well. I actually don't want to talk much about it. Yes.
Mm-hmm. You've been really fortunate to be able to travel around the world. You were educated partly in the Czech Republic, UK. I don't know if you've been in Ghana, but you wrote about it. India. What did you observe as an observer in different countries about status of women and gender roles?
Okay, good. So I actually haven't been to Ghana. I just conducted a virtual discussion with them. So I've actually been to, so I've been to 25 countries across Europe, Asia, and I've been to New Zealand. So around 10 of them, I'm not sure I can talk about because I visited them when I was really young, as a child, and also before I had really started to think of things in terms of gender. But I would like to speak of one specific aspect of these cultural differences. I think there are stereotypes and maybe common knowledge of how gender works in South Asia, right? You would already know that South Asia is this very patriarchal society. It's within a patriarchal framework that we function. But I also would like to draw attention to some aspects of some cultural differences that I noticed between Sri Lanka and Europe. So in South Asia, we do have serious problems. But I've also realized that what are problems in the West, in Europe, are not really problems here. Right? So here I would like to speak only for Sri Lanka because that is all I know about. In detail, I don't want to generalize saying that this is the same case for India as well. So, for example, let's take breastfeeding, for example. I came across some photos and news items of women in the US protesting for the right to breastfeed in public, right? And I've seen this being talked of in European parliaments as well. And I have to say that this is not a problem at all in Sri Lanka because women just go. It's perfectly normal for a woman to breastfeed on the bus or in a park or any public space, and people are not going to care about it because they see it as just a mother feeding her child. And obviously there are going to be some people who will be leering at this woman in a very inappropriate way, but that's not the norm. And people it was because it's not an issue in the first place. We don't need it to be legalized because no one sort of criminalized it in the first place. So that is that. And then also I noticed, so this is something I noticed from a very young age. So the practice of the woman changing her surname after marriage, that is not the norm among Sinhala Buddhist women. in the country. And also Muslim women. I think Muslim women also don't change their surname. So especially if you take my mother's generation, a majority of them have their own surnames that they brought. I mean, it's technically still patriarchal. I mean, they still have their father's surname, but they don't change their surname to the husband's surname. They do have their, father's, maiden name, um, and it's only in these westernized urban settings in the country where they actually change these surnames, and then people are like, why should we change our surnames? We should stop changing our surnames. But the thing is, you don't need to talk about it because the majority of the country actually doesn't change their surname. So that is one thing. And can I go on? Just I'll
Please.
Like 3 or 4 more examples. Yeah. Okay. So another one is proposing marriage, right? I think proposing marriage. It's this idea of this woman waiting and waiting until the economy of Western proposals. But proposals of that kind were not common in our country. It was either, okay, so in the case of arranged marriages, that didn't happen. It was just the parents, proposing, arranging, fixing the marriage. But if you had a relationship, then you would both talk about it, and the woman wouldn't it wouldn't be such a big thing. Like a woman wouldn't wait for a man to propose. They would just talk about it and then get married. But now, because of Western commercialization and this kind of things that we see in movies, proposing of that sort has started to happen in urban areas in my country. And right now it happens in a very sweet way. Like, they do discuss first, that we should get married next year, and then next month before the wedding or some, then this guy gets down on his knee and proposes, right? So it happens in that way for now in the country. But I'm a little worried that in the future, this whole aspect of talking together about marriage might just disappear, and we might also end up just waiting for the man to propose. I think if such an attitude is ingrained in our society, it's going to be very dangerous, and that's not an attitude that we had in the first place. So that's it about proposing. And just last night we had this discussion on fairy tales, on Disney fairy tales, and according, like, if you take my environment, all the boys I know and the boys I'm friends with, they have no problem, watching Disney cartoons with all these princesses, and they have no problems, reading fairy tales. But then in this discussion, we came to realize that in the West, boys do have a problem with, watching the stories with women, princesses in them. I actually don't know. I hadn't really thought about it, but just, someone brought it up. So I'm not sure if I'm entirely correct in that. But I just want to put it out just to show that, that we never really had a problem with that. And also,
I think those movies are sold as girls' movies. The Disney ones about the princess or the mermaid or whatever, they're definitely seen as girls' films.
Right. So, but it's not here. I mean, everyone is okay with watching them. And then also there are cultural differences between urban versus village as well, even in the same country. So, for example, if you take a father in the city, he might have a problem with his son playing with a doll, right, with a girl doll. But then if you go to a village, those fathers won't have any problem at all with their son playing with a doll. But I'm not saying that we don't have problems at all. We do have very serious problems. We live in a patriarchal society. But what I'm saying is that these problems are also different. What are problems in the West are not problems for us here. Just like what is normal here might be seen as problematic in the West. So those are some of the cultural differences that I wanted to bring attention to, because people only talk of how South Asia is stringent and patriarchal, and it has all these rules, and it's very strict for women. But I just wanted to bring some of these things up into the discussion.
I did a book called Happy Marriages recently that included couples with long happy marriages from different countries, and the woman from India said she was so happy that she had an arranged marriage because she didn't have to date. She didn't have to play, oh, you big, some handsome man, and flirt and, go out on dates with boring men. And so the dating thing, she was so relieved not to have to do. I thought, oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Well, I mean, there are downsides to arranged marriages as well, but yeah, that there is a fun aspect to having an arranged marriage, I guess. I think I want to bring at this point. So when usually when Westerners hear the term arranged marriage, they think that it's a forced marriage, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It can just be, parents introducing you to someone else. Yes.
When I was in India, I met two brothers who were working on a fiance for their sister who is a physician, and they had a point system, and they would interview guys like minus points because he has new shoes, he looks too eager, plus points, this degree. They'd present all this evidence to the sister, and then she'd say, okay, I will interview him, but not him. So yeah, it's totally up to the woman. In educated families, they just check on with the neighbors and the family and see that he's appropriate, which is a smart thing to do, really, to do a background check.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Because that's what basically happens in arranged marriages. Yeah.
What's your attitude, may I ask, towards marriage and dating? At 26, you're kind of in the middle of thinking about all that, maybe.
Yeah, so I'm not against marriage. That's one aspect of what you're asking. I would like to get married someday. Here in my country, I think the norm is the dating scene. If you take the dating scene, you date to marry basically, and you only break up if marriage doesn't seem realistic or plausible in the long run. But you basically date to marry. So that's what the dating scene is like, essentially, for singles in my country. And then if you don't, I think it's also good that, so if you don't find someone, then you can easily fall back on that arranged marriage thing as well, and no one will think anything about it. It won't be, no one will make fun of you for it. It's very normal. It's very normal, and maybe even more accepted to get your parents to find someone for you.
What are you thinking?
I would like to meet someone on my own, but I'm not entirely opposed to arranged marriage, as long as, okay, so I don't mind meeting someone through my parents, but I would like to, take some time to get to know that person, like, at least 1 or 2 years.
Right. I think it's a class, come on, Skype. Okay, Sky. All we heard was, I'm not against arranged marriage, but, and then Skype cut out.
Oh, right. So I'm not against.
I'm going to get rid of my video, and that may help. Wait. Okay. That may make the Skype connection better.
Okay. I'm not sure what I said.
You just said, okay. I'm not against arranged marriage.
Okay. Yeah. So, I wouldn't mind getting into an arranged marriage, but only if I can, get to know that person for about 2 years before marriage. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What brought you to the Czech Republic? That's kind of an unusual place to study.
Oh, well, that was a scholarship offered to me, offered to our faculty, and I just applied for it and I got it. I just wanted to, go and experience learning in a different country as an adult. So that's why, and it was a wonderful experience studying in the Czech Republic. I learned so much about, Eastern Europe is something, Central and Eastern Europe. I only knew anything about Western Europe and, that side of the world, but I didn't really know about Central and Eastern Europe. So I learned much about, cultures and languages in that part of the world, and that was a wonderful experience.
What was it like being in a former Soviet influence country? I mean, I think of Soviet Russia having a lot of influence.
Yeah. So one thing I noticed was that they were little less. I think they were little suspicious of foreigners, and not just because I was like conspicuously brown, right? But it's not because of that. It's not related to my skin color or anything. I think in general they were little wary of strangers and foreigners. They were little wary of other white foreigners as well. So it's nothing related to my skin color, but related to they were little wary of Croatians, Spanish, and so that was them at the beginning. But once you get to know them, Czech people are really nice and hospitable and wonderful people, and I really like them. I've had the most amazing time with some of them. But there's so much. So many countries have ruled over them. They've had the Austro-Hungarian Empire as well, and then the Germans came and occupied them for a brief period of time. So because of all of that, they're wary of strangers and foreigners. That's what they told me. And there was some stuff that I didn't notice, but a Croatian told me. That Czech people, I think, because of the influence of the Soviet Union, they seem to wear very gray, bleak colors like gray and so on. But I didn't really notice that. I didn't really see it as something that was different from other Central and Eastern European countries. But a Croatian told me that. So I guess that's the only thing that I have of being in a former Soviet country. But other than that, I think other traces of it are completely gone, I think.
Did they have women's studies courses?
I am actually not sure. I think they definitely would have. I just did a particular course on British women's writing, but I'm not sure of women's studies courses separately.
How did you get involved with a conversation with Ghanaians?
Oh, okay. So I am a member of a charity organization, a professional and charity organization called Rotract. It's a worldwide organization, but I think mostly prevalent in South Asia and Africa. So we have this. So it's a network, right, of Rotract clubs all over the world. And we had this partner project with a club in Ghana, and so in that project, they wanted to talk about female genital mutilation. So that is a problem that is very prevalent in Ghana, but not in Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, it does happen, but it's very negligible. It's not a common thing, right? Actually, a lot of people don't know that FGM actually happens in the country. It's like totally new to a lot of people in the country. So what we did was we just had this joint discussion to sort of spread awareness that this happens, right? And then I tried to fuse it with cultural myths that we have in Sri Lanka related to virginity, because I think that's the main reason that FGM happens, right? Sewing the clitoris together, all of that. So I just talked about cultural myths that we have and how we should overcome them. So it was nice. The discussion was lovely. We had input from both countries and both insight into both cultures. That is how I got involved with this particular project.
And what did they find was most influential in telling women and grandmothers, don't sew your daughter's labia together, don't cut off their external genitalia? What worked?
I think they focused mostly on educating the younger generation. I'm actually not sure of how they. So the entire premise of the discussion was to sort of educate the younger generation, and we did talk about how we can try talking to older people because they would learn, right? There are people of the older generation who do learn from what we say. So keep on talking. That is what basically we talked about. Keep on talking, but I think the Ghanaians, their uh, main aim was to educate the younger generation. So from there, at least it'll stop.
Mm-hmm. You also do a kind of an international discussion on Zoom with the Plain Tea Talk space. How did that get started, and what have you talked about?
Okay, so Plain Tea Talk Space originated in August 2020. That was right in the middle of lockdown, right? So we didn't really have the sort of intellectual stimulation. We couldn't go to universities. I was just an undergraduate back then. So two of my friends and I, we decided to open this platform for youth to voice their opinions on a variety of topics and engage in stimulating intellectual discussion regarding contemporary issues. And I have to explain the name plain tea as well. So you might wonder why plain tea. You have tea that is plain. Why do we call our Zoom group as that? So plain tea is a uniquely Sri Lankan name for tea with or without sugar and no milk. Right? So you just have tea without milk. So tea with milk is by default referred to as tea in Sri Lanka. Or if one really needs to make this distinction, milk tea. Right? So plain tea differs from green tea, mint tea, and other assortment of teas in that it refers exclusively to black tea without milk. So the basis for naming the platform after this concoction lies in the very social history of plain tea in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka's history with tea begins in the 1880s under the British colonial rule. So it was known as Ceylon back then. Ceylon rapidly became one of the world's largest tea exporters, and in a trade that was so embedded in the British Empire, this beverage itself was considered one that belonged to elite society, right? Tea, tea with milk, especially because it contained milk, which was considered a luxury, right? However, as with most colonial products, tea itself was kind of localized and and that was one way in which resistance was brewed against its elite beverage ancestry. So plain tea, as it is called, is viewed as a more democratic drink because it's a drink without milk, which was considered a luxury back then. And this is a drink that you can find anywhere across the country, including the humblest of all places. So as a democratic drink, naming the platform Plain Tea Talk Space aligns with the very principles of the platform. So our main objective is the democratization of education and knowledge. So presentations are conducted on any topic in any discipline, and the ensuing discussions are always multi-perspectival, with insight coming in from the humanities, the sciences, the social sciences, and so on. So we believe that this is very conducive to not only educating people on many areas, but also catalyzing some amount of social change as we very often attempt to test them out. So we have around 1,000 email subscribers, around 500 active members, but they come for the topics that most interest them. So it's around 35 to 45 people each week. And we have people from United Kingdom, Spain, and India. So the people in United Kingdom are mostly expatriates, Sri Lankan expatriates living in the United Kingdom.
And how do you organize it? Is there a leader like you? Is there, okay, next time we're going to discuss the women's history in your country, or how do you organize it?
This is a platform for anyone to talk about. So we just ask people. We have released a Google form, and we ask people if they're interested in doing presentations. So if they're interested in doing presentations, we organize this roster. So this person does a presentation this week, and they decide what they want to talk about. So we don't try to control that. They can decide what to talk about. They can do their own presentation, but during the discussion, we would try to ask things in terms of gender or any other perspective that is not usually spoke of in the mainstream. That is how we. I'm generally handling the presentations. I would ask people who wants to do a presentation this week or the next week, and then I find them, and then I arrange it. I make a poster, and then I publish it out there. So this presentation is happening this week. So it's mostly me and another friend. We just handle what's happening. The kind of we just so she's handling the right space aspect of it, where we release an article each week on Monday. So we meet on Saturday. We have this Zoom discussion on Saturday. But on Monday, for people who don't like speaking, they can write something, and we publish it on our Facebook page.
What are some of the interesting presentations that kind of have stuck with you? Like, that really made me think.
Yeah. So there was one presentation that was on women in military. So she talked about women's roles throughout history and how they disguise themselves as men and went to war, and it was a presentation like that. And then there was another one on the automobile industry, and it was really nice because the guy who did it, he talked about cars as if they were people. He personified cars, and it was like he was talking about his old friends. And then we've had a few presentations related to ethnic fluidity in the country. So those are some of the main presentations that have sort of stuck in, that I've found striking. And then every month we try to have this movie discussion, which is conducted by the other co-founder and me. And I think out of those, my favorite is the discussion that we had on a TV series called Squid Game. I'm not sure if you
I've heard of it.
So
it's Japanese or Thai or
South Korean.
South Korean, and they kill people or something terrible.
Oh yeah, they do. It is terrible. But we analyzed it in terms of corporatism and capitalism and themes like that, and that was enlightening for me. I'm not someone who likes bloody TV shows. I avoid anything and everything which has killing in it.
Me too.
But I wanted to watch this because it was very psychological and social. I would advise you to watch it if it doesn't, disturb you. So we had this wonderful discussion on Squid Game with regard to its social and political context.
Roughly what percent of the members of the Zoom group are female?
I think we have. I think it's like everyone is equal. Like I think we have 50-50. But I think participants wise, I think it's very hard to say because it differs from topic to topic. I would say we have an equal participation, but I actually haven't taken note of it. I should, but we do have significant female participation, right? We have significant female participation and male participation. So even if we talk about something related to feminism, there is a significant male participation. So it's not like where, if there is a women's topic, only women turn up. No, everyone turns up in equal numbers. But I would like to, actually look into it deeper. I hadn't really thought of it because according to what I've seen, I've just seen everyone in equal numbers.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. You've also done research on skin color, and I know in Indian matrimonial ads they'll say fair-skinned man seeks educated BA, homely woman. Is it like that in Sri Lanka too?
Very much the same. Very much the same. So in matrimonial advertisements, you would find, looking for fair-skinned woman, and so on. But again, that is reducing, I think. So you have this concept of, the fair skin is beautiful, right? And then I think mostly what made me write my dissertation was my paper mostly was because of these advertisements for Fair and Lovely and these billboards of Fair and Lovely everywhere, and I'm a darker skinned girl myself, and I've heard compliments like, you're dark but you're beautiful, and you're beautiful for a dark skinned girl, which are, they think it's a compliment, right? But it's obviously not. And Fair and Lovely has, changed their name into Glow and Lovely. So they've taken that emphasis out of fair. But I think the models they use for their advertisements are still fair skin. So, I'm not sure. So the glow still implies fairness. So I'm not sure how much has really changed, but at least they've taken fair out of it. But we'll see how it goes. So I think it was mostly these advertisements that wanted me to that made me want to write a paper on it.
Mm-hmm. What are you now in a PhD program? You're only 26 and you're teaching. What do you have your PhD? Where are you in that process?
Okay, so the thing about Sri Lanka is that we leave school at 19 and we start university at 21, right? So that's the default age. So I started my degree at 21. I finished it at 24. I think 21 is when, I suppose, people in the US probably finish their degrees, 21, 22, but that's when we start our bachelor's degree. So I started it at 21 and finished it at 24. Sorry, 25. So last year, 25. I was 25 when I finished my degree. So I'm just, fresh out of my degree, and I'm applying for my master's. So hopefully it goes well, and then I get to, do my master's where I have applied. So I'm nowhere near the PhD yet.
So you're a lecturer at the university. What is that the title they give you when you're teaching?
Yeah, the lecturer temporary. So that is something that they give out to. It's sort of like an assistant lecturer post, but the title is lecturer. But it's technically like if you, it might be more of like this assistant lecturer post in other countries. So that is something that we are given after we graduate. And we work for about 1 year, and we help the senior staff in teaching, and mostly in teaching, giving extra classes, and also giving, remedial writing lessons.
And do your teachers call you ma'am or madam, or what? How do they address you?
My students?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they call me ma'am. Yeah, ma'am, madam.
Yeah, right. In the West, a lot of young people are rethinking gender, and they're telling you my pronouns are not she or he, they're they. I'm non-binary. I'm a demigirl. I'm asexual. I'm this or that. They're really exploring that there isn't a binary gender category. Do you hear that from young people there as well?
It's not very common. That is very limited to a very specific segment in society. It's a very small minority. So it's not normal for me to say that these are my pronouns, except if I go into that sort of atmosphere. So it's not we don't normally usually talk of pronouns or even sexuality, calling ourselves demigirl, and it isn't very normal, but it is prevalent among a certain segment of society. But if you really want to know my pronouns, I go by she and her. Yeah.
Me too. Also in the West, there's growing concern about youth mental health, anxiety and depression, more common, at least presenting in young women. And I wondered if there's discussion of youth mental health problems, or that's not an issue.
No, they do talk about it now, and I think it's very much needed, because we are a culture which we try to I think cover things up. I think so that should be out of the way, and the girls and teenagers generally, especially teenagers, they need to have some sort of mental health support. So people are talking about it, and I think it's a really good thing that people are now talking about it. It wasn't the case maybe like 5 or 10 years ago, but now people are talking about it.
Some people link the anxiety and depression partly to social media use, and other people look better than me, get more likes than me, are invited to a party that I wasn't invited to, or some event. Do you think that's a useful approach or not? The influence of social media.
Yeah, the thing is, yes, I mean, that is a problem. Like, I do know a lot of people who are very concerned about their appearance and, getting invited to, certain places. But I think that is prevalent whether you have social media or not. If it's not social media, then there'll be another source for all of that anxiety. Social media is just one of these sources, I think. So even before social media, people had these problems, right? So yeah.
But do you think it's increased because of social media, fears about the environment and destruction of the planet's environment, terrorism? I don't know. Has it become more problematic?
Um, in one way, yes, it might have been it might seem as more problematic, but also in another way, I think we are getting more information about things that are happening, right? So I think in the past, these things might have happened, just that we didn't really know about it. But now, we get more information by things being shared, and also simply by things being shared, we learn more about how to sort of conduct ourselves, how to that this is not the way that things are supposed to happen, and we should be better people, and we learn stuff from social media as well.
And what does social media teach us about how we should behave?
Okay, so for example, if you take psychological mental support, for example, so about 10 years ago, if someone shared a post about how we should be that we should be concerned about mental health support, and we should especially get boys to get more mental health support, because they might not receive emotional support from their peers. If someone shared like that maybe 10 years ago, people would have just laughed at it and called that person I don't know, sissy, for sharing something like that. But I've noticed that now, especially the teenagers and people in their early 20s, they share stuff like that, and it's well received. They don't have any problems when they start sharing posts like that. They're not called sissies or anything. So like that, people are starting to change. And then I think when it comes to feminism as well, I think people still do laugh whenever you post a feminist post. But generally, people are more aware of how things should be, perhaps, and they are more aware of sensibilities, by political sensibilities. So I think that is one way in which social media educates us.
That's interesting because it does educate us, and we know about global issues, and we know about climate change, um, and we have access to information about sexuality or that people didn't have before. So it's a mixed blessing.
Yeah, it's a mixed blessing. Exactly. It has both the bad and good. Yes.
Yeah. Um, Around the world, except in sub-Saharan Africa, women are the majority of college students. Is that true in Sri Lanka as well? And if so, what's happening to the boys?
Yeah, so in Sri Lanka, yes. So in we call it batch here, that is for class. So in my year at university, we had like 800 girls and like 70 boys.
70, seven
Yeah,
zero,
sorry?
70.
Yeah, 70.
Oh my goodness. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
77, 80, that number. So you see, uh, yeah, so it's like 11 girls for one boy. And in another setting, I think in one of the medical faculty batches, it's not as bad, but it's like 80 boys and 120 girls. So yeah, that and the only place where it's sort of overturned is in the engineering faculty where it's like completely the other way around. It's like 800 boys and like 70 girls.
Right.
So that's the only place where it's sort of the other way around. But my faculty, I mean, it's the Faculty of Arts, and it's usually a lot of girls who do it. But yes, so there is a problem. And I think, yeah, Warren Farrell, I think, calls it a boy crisis due to a crisis in mental health. Like, boys um, are more and more getting low proficiency in math, reading, etc. But the problem I see is that, when some people talk of it in terms of boy crisis, they try to blame feminism for all these problems, which
Mm.
is not the right approach. I mean, I've seen a lot of men's rights activists blaming feminism for all the problems that boys have. But boys' problems related to mental health, they are forced by patriarchy itself, right? Um, and also, if we feel that it is strange that there are more women, that means we expect that men should be there, right? It's as if de facto men should be there, and it's suddenly problematic when men are not there. So I'm not sure whether we should be taking that approach as well. And I think boys, especially in Sri Lanka, I don't know about anywhere else, but in Sri Lanka, boys are moving into professional spheres more. I think like they would start working immediately after school, some of them. So yeah, but I really don't, and it's a little puzzling for me as well. And also in Sri Lanka, so we have the state universities, which are the sort of prestigious universities where based on your marks you get into these. It's very our A levels are extremely competitive, and we have free education, right? So it's very competitive to get into state universities. Um, it's based on your advanced level marks, and then you based on your marks you get into whatever university. So it's very competitive, and I've seen that a lot more boys are opting for private institutes in the country because they can't get into state university, so they get into private institutes.
Hmm. Oh, why do you think it is that boys aren't getting as good marks as girls?
So I think it could definitely be due to mental health issues sometimes, which needs to be addressed. Um, Also, I mean, I don't want to say that women might be actually more intelligent, but um, you know women were shut away from universities for the longest time, right? And now you actually see the potential of women. So when they're in an equal stage, I mean, it might be just that they're just performing better sometimes than men. So I really don't know. I don't want to essentialize gender either. So yeah.
Hmm. Um, when you are keeping up with women's movement around the world, are there websites that you follow, or people that you are interested in finding their latest thinking, or are there organizations and actions that you look to as feminist leaders and
Um,
inspiring people?
I actually don't follow women's organizations much. I think I just go mostly by reading theory. But of course, I mean, I do need the practice element as well. So I follow some pages on Instagram and Facebook, and they're actually quite good. People tend to think that Facebook and Instagram can be very frivolous, but no, they are sites of very good learning. And from those sites, I get access to different. I get references to different books as well, so I go and check them out. So that is where I mostly sort of follow the feminist movement around the world. But other than that,
Wait, excuse me. What are those sites on Instagram and Facebook? What are they called?
Oh, right. Oh dear.
You can send me a list.
Yeah, maybe I can send you a list of what I'm following. Yeah, so there are some South Asian pages as well that I follow. Yeah, so there's quite a lot actually. And then there's this activist organization that I really admire called Men Care, I think, where they try to build healthy masculinity.
How do you spell that? MEN?
CARE. That's, I think, World Organ. I'm not sure where it's located. And I also take inspiration from women's development centers across my country as well. I think that doing quite a good service. I haven't been able to work with any of them, but I think they are doing quite a good service, and I admire them for their work as well. Their work, practical work, and research.
If you got your ideal PhD program, what university would that be? Where would that be?
Oh, oh. So, I would really love to study in a university like in the UK. I would like to really study in maybe Oxford or Cambridge if that is possible. And in the US, I actually like UCLA. I think UCLA is my dream university for now, I think.
I have a master's degree from UCLA in
Oh,
history.
right. Okay. Oh, yeah, I think I knew that. Yeah.
And then, what do you see yourself doing 10 years from now? You'll have finished a PhD program and being a professor?
I want to be in the academia, so I would go on to do master's, PhD, and maybe be a lecturer, yes, a researcher, because I love teaching, I love sharing education, but I also sometimes have this, I would like to, so I'm into theater, right? So I would like to get into theater, maybe as an academic myself, but there's another interest of mine to work in a library or a museum, so maybe that's something also that I would like to explore, working in a library or museum, because I'm really into archival research.
Interesting. Have we left anything out that you think we should think about in terms of your perspective of your activism, your understanding of feminism and equality?
Okay, so I think I would like to give a sort of advice to feminists, especially I would only like to speak for my country and maybe some people out there. I think we have to sort of culturally nuance our practice of feminism as well, because you have to know how to pick your battles. Because, for example, I mentioned about changing surnames, right? So if someone here in the country tries to launch this activism, this huge campaign on women, how women should not change their surnames, that is going to be extremely futile in a country like ours, because the norm is, for at least Sinhala Buddhists, for the norm is to not change their surnames, right? And then if you talk about something like breastfeeding, for example, how you should legalize breastfeeding, people are just going to not take you seriously, because that is not a problem in the country. So you should know how to pick your battles, because what are issues in another country might not be an issue here. So like that, you shouldn't make it your, and even in the country, like I've noticed a lot of people in the cities, they have this perspective that, women in the villages are, that they should be pitied, and, we should go and empower them. The thing is, they already do have some level of empowerment. So don't make it your burden. Like, try to work with them and not for them. Maybe just try to work with them. I think that is something that we should, as actors, as feminists, we should keep in mind, I think.
What would you say the Sri Lankan women's issues are? It's not access to education. You've had women leaders who were heads of state. What would you say the issues are?
I guess the general stereotypes and prejudices, right? So for example, I think the main problem is that our problems don't seem big enough to fight against, right? So you have a lot of protests in India that are happening, right? And that is because the problems that they face have to be fought against, right? But here it's like, problems are very much there, but they are not blatant enough to fight against. And sometimes that can be a little worse, because then when you try to fight against it, people can be like, why are you fighting against this? Is not such a big problem, and other people have it much worse. But you have to talk about it. I think that is our main problem. They are not blatant enough to be viewed as worthy enough to fight against. I think that's one of the main problems. But generally, we have problems of gender stereotypes. Gender stereotypes, basically, this is how a woman should be, and this is how, basically stereotypes and gender roles.
And is that women should be subordinate and helpful and good wives and mothers? Is that the stereotype, or what is the stereotype?
That is pretty much the stereotype, that a woman should be subordinate and shouldn't try to circumvent the husband's position. That is a stereotype, but of course that is not that's a stereotype. But there are so many women who are sort of resisting against it.
Mm-hmm. Do you find among your students that they call themselves feminists, or they think feminist means you hate men?
So at the beginning, during the first year, a lot of students are, anti-feminists, so to speak. But then later on, then they start reading things in a gendered way, and they start realizing, especially in our studies, because we go into gendered reading of stuff, they learn that, we have been thinking in a completely wrong way, and we should change our thinking.
An interesting novel is by Marge Piercy called "Woman on the Edge of Time," and I use that as a discussion topic because it's a novel about a society with no gender roles, nothing, and
Okay.
it's very extreme, but it makes people think about, what do I want to keep, and what is imposed upon me by traditional gender roles.
Right. I actually have women on the edge of Earth. Is that it?
On the Edge of Time.
On the edge
Tim.
of time, right?
Marge Piercy, yeah.
Okay, so I'll check that out. That sounds very interesting. There's actually a comic series called The Last Man or something that was, I think that was printed 20 years ago. It was about the last man on Earth and how he sort of navigates living in a world where women rule. That's also quite interesting because it shows that it shows how women can be oppressors themselves if they follow this patriarchal framework.
Mm, mm, mm. All right. Thank you.